Let's study the negative interrogative clause with the modal verb. The negative interrogative clause is made up of the adverb not and the phrase of the verb. The negative clause is made by the series of the adverbs to include the adverb not. Neither, nor, etc. are also able to make the clause as the negative clause. The speaker applies the modal verb not to emphasize that the clause is stated on the premise that even though the definition of the modal verb to start the interrogative clause is denied by the adverb not, the intention to convey with the phrase of the verb, the modal verb is so assured by the speaker. The speaker just wants to emphasize the definition conveyed from the phrase of the verb. There is a clause. Don't you imagine the better world? The speaker applies the adverb not to describe the definition of the modal verb do, to emphasize that the speaker sets the premise that the listener as the subject surely actualize the condition indicated by the transitive verb imagine. The speaker sets the premise that the transitive verb imagine describes the condition of the listeners. The listeners reveal the intention to agree or disagree on the condition indicated by the transitive verb imagine, which is emphasized by the modal verb do, regardless of the definition of the adverb not, to emphasize the definition of the modal verb do. So the listeners as these clauses. The listeners who confirm the condition of the listeners as positive answer with yes, I do. This means yes, I do imagine the better world. So we can know that the denial conveyed from the adverb not is not considered in this response. The listeners who do not want to confirm the accordance between the interrogative clause and the present with this response, no, I don't. This means that the listeners reveal the correlation between the present and the description by the modal verb do and the transitive verb imagine as negative. So the listeners intend to say like this: no, I don't imagine the better world. The response is yes and no are not determined by the adverb not. There is another clause. Can't you imagine the better world? The speaker describes the definition of the modal verb can with the adverb not to emphasize that the speaker sets the premise that the listeners as the subject surely have the ability to actualize the condition indicated by the transitive verb imagine, with the consideration that the adverb not to emphasize the definition of the modal verb can, we can know that the speaker sets the premise that the listeners are surely assumed to have the ability to actualize the condition indicated by the transitive verb imagine. The listeners reveal the intention to agree or disagree on the assumption of the speaker that the listeners as the subject are able to actualize the condition indicated by the transitive verb imagine, which is described by the modal verb can, regardless of the definition of the adverb. Note, to emphasize the definition of the modal verb can, we can figure out that the responses yes or no clarify the accordance between the assumption of the listeners and the assumption of the speaker. The listeners who respond with yes means that yes, I can imagine the better world. This means that the listeners assume to have the ability to actualize the condition indicated by the transitive verb imagine. The correlation between the assumption of the speaker and the assumption of the listeners are accorded as positive. The listeners who respond with no, I can't, means that no, I can't imagine the better world. The listeners intend to reveal between the assumption of the speaker and the assumption of the listeners as negative.